Welcome everybody to the ICC Digital Trade Conference. My name is Chris Southworth. I'm the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce here in the UK. And I'm delighted to welcome you to our second session in day two of this conference covering the digitalisation and standardisation of shipping and logistics. We've had four fantastic sessions already during day one and earlier this morning, with some really interesting common themes coming up throughout. Could I just encourage you in the audience to please provide questions and chat. It's interesting to hear your views. We've had some very lively conversations over the last day or so, and your input is really valuable in helping us shape what happens next. So if I could ask all of our panel and moderator to come on screen. And while they're doing that, I'm going to introduce you to Nguyen, who's Ecosystems Director at the ICC Digital Standards Initiative and our moderator today. And just a point for everyone in the audience, Hannah is one of the go-to people in ICC. So if you haven't met her, I would highly recommend that you do. Sorry, Hannah, for probably loading up your inbox, but she is fantastic and really at the heart of this whole effort on standardizing world trade. So she's your go-to person. We can obviously help you make connections there as well if you need it. So Hannah, over to you. I will now come off screen and leave it to you to moderate the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris, for that very warm introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Hannah Nguyen, Director of Digital Ecosystems at the ICC Digital Standards Initiative. I lead a small team with a big mission to help accelerate the trade and supply chain digitization journey across the world. And our goal is to work with all of you and to enable all supply chain participants to be able to exchange trade and supply chain data digitally, end-to-end, and doing so in an open, interoperable environment, which is underpinned by enabling laws and regulations. So today is my tremendous pleasure to be moderating this panel alongside our four distinguished panelists who will take us on a journey together towards digitalizing and standardizing shipping and logistics trade systems. So without further ado, let us get to know our panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could ask you to please briefly introduce who you are, what you do, and share with our audience some of the key highlights in terms of your organization's role in the shipping and logistics ecosystem. So let us start with the only lady in the room, Lucelia. Would you like to start first?
Thank you, Anna. Yes, so hello everybody. So I'm Koscielecki. I'm the Digital Project Officer at FIATA. So I've been asked to replace Stefan, our Director General. He deeply apologized for not being able to join. But so basically, for those who don't know FIATA, so it's the International Federation of Freight Forwarders Association. So we do represent freight forwarders in 150 countries. We have 111 association members and more than 5,500 individual members. So that represents a total of 4,000 companies around the world. And our main mission is really to represent, lead, and unify the freight forwarding industry.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lucelia. How about you, James? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Hannah. Yes, hello, everybody. My name is James Hookham. I'm the Secretary General of the Global Shippers Forum. GSF has been established for over 20 years. It represents the interests of cargo owners, the buyers, the sellers, the importers, the exporters, but those that are actually arranging for goods to be shipped by all modes of transport, and those that ultimately control the supply chains along which these goods move. We provide an interface with the international regulatory community for national shippers organizations all around the world. And we have a wide range of interests across the commercial, the safety, the environmental, and obviously the trade facilitation aspects of international trade. It's great to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. I'm sure we will be able to have a very interesting conversations around all of those aspects that you just mentioned. Could we go to you next, Filip? Could you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Hannah. Hello, everyone. My name is Filip Koscielecki, and by background, I'm a lawyer. But for the last 7 years, I've been working at Thomas Miller, handling a variety of claims for the UK P&I and defense clubs. For those who don't know, P&I clubs are mutual insurers providing cover for third-party liabilities, so it's a legal liability insurer. And also in the last few years, I've been involved with the International Group of P&I Clubs. That's an organization that unites 13 largest P&I clubs and jointly providing cover for 90% of the world ocean-going tonnage. And there I'm part of the working group preparing approvals from a P&I cover perspective for electronic bills of lading systems. Personally, I'm passionate about technology, innovation, and digital transformation in international trade. And I look forward to participating in this panel. Thank you.
Fantastic. I think you have a very interesting mix of experience, and the expertise that you have in terms of, the intersection between legal and technology is going to bring some very interesting discussion points going forward. So last but not least, let us hear from Patrik. Here you go.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, ICC UK, for a really, really nice event. I've been listening to the session in the morning. Really appreciated. So my name is Patrik Zekkar. I'm CEO of Enigio, which is a deep tech company based in Stockholm, with the focus on our Trace Original document, which is a freely transferable digital document utilized in trade, transport and logistics, certification, and similar areas. So look very much forward to today.
Great. Okay, so now that we have heard from all of our panelists in terms of what they do, where they come from, and some of the key highlights of their organization's role in shipping and logistics, let us dive right in. And James, I would like to start the first question with you, if you don't mind, because, as that representative of the global trade body that speaks up for and advises shippers and cargo owners as they go about doing international trade, I'm sure you have some interesting observations, especially in terms of the challenges that they have faced in the last 2 years with the pandemic, and of course with the ongoing challenges in the supply chain as we speak today, talking about some of the geopolitical issues that we have to face, and of course many others. So could you help us walk through some of those challenges as you see from your members? And could you, just answer the very important question that I'm thinking is on the top of everyone's mind? Can going digital actually be part of the solution? Or is that not the only part of the solution? Are there parts of it that are not just about going digital?
Well, thanks, Anna. Yes, and what a couple of years it's been. Clearly, the whole issue, the opportunities, the benefits of digitalisation of international trade documentation and shipping documentation have been discussed and developed long before COVID. But I think it's fair to say that the early months of the pandemic, the resultant impacts on economies and on global transport links crystallized a lot of the issues that had been thought to be there. And all of a sudden, if you recall, there was an urgent need to avoid contact with physical documents and physical anything, wasn't there? So all of a sudden, the onset of measures to restrict the spread of the COVID virus suddenly start to bring to the front a lot of the benefits of digitalization. And apart from, as I say, the obvious thing is we don't really want to be touching paper documents anymore. It's important to understand the wider impacts that were taking place at the time. Not least the very abrupt loss of many connecting flights. Many air services were simply grounded because of the impact of and the fear and the need to restrict the spread of the virus. And clearly that caused a lot of inconvenience for passengers, but also it represented a loss of an important channel for the communication of urgent shipping documents. And although that has recovered and alternative arrangements were found, suddenly the dependency on the physical movement of documents to catch up with the goods or arrive ahead of the goods suddenly came into stark view. And then, of course, as the pandemic played out, we saw this very frustrating, so asynchronous opening or closing and opening of economies, as the pandemic took hold and recoveries were made from these in different countries. And this again introduced unpredictability and uncertainty into a system. And certainly on top of all the other activities that shipping managers around the world had to cope with, keeping track on where documents were and how they were being safely and reliably handled suddenly became a burden, which I think a lot of them realized they could well do without. So to your question, Hannah, I think there are a lot of valuable learnings from the difficult experiences of the past 2 years, and it's important that they are learnt from and capitalized upon. And I think it's worth saying that pleasingly, and I suspect coincidentally, just as we started to come through the pandemic, there were some very, very important developments and announcements made in the global trading community about significant advances in the digitalisation progress. And I, for one, was particularly impressed with the speed and the comprehensiveness with which the Digital Container Ship Association started to roll out its standards and started to put at the front door of those that use container shipping services some meaningful and usable standardization and protocols that, whilst principally aimed at the communications and exchange of information between shipping lines, nevertheless had clear interfaces with the shipper, not least with the standardization and the protocols for the e-bill of lading. We then saw big announcements around the widening of the trade lens initiative, which involves the use of blockchain and distributed ledger systems to exchange documents. And of course, then in the past year, the publication of ICC's Digital Trade Roadmap, which I think brought together in a very useful way a lot of the needs and opportunities. And joyously, certainly from a shipper's point of view, the bringing together of the relevant parties in the future of International Trade Alliance. And I'm sure we'll hear from FIATA a lot more about that, and indeed from ICC itself. But sitting here in the UK, where the GSF is based, but observing the impact of the global pandemic on the global trade and the way in which national economies have reacted and adapted, I think there are some important opportunities for us to learn and to build on and demonstrate how digitalization of some very clunky, very antiquated systems can not only protect us against future disruption and provide some resilience into global supply chains, which is a hot topic now in many boardrooms, but also a route to significant operational cost savings. And I think this is a timely conference in which to begin the discussion about how those are brought to the attention of the global trading community and how we actually turn aspiration and undoubted opportunity to commercialize this into real savings and benefits for traders around the world, both large and both small. And I expect we'll return to that later in this session. Thank you.
Thank you, James. That was very clear and very succinctly put. So I couldn't have put that better, in terms of your great summary in terms of the reactions turning into adaptations of the different, shippers community, but also the rest of the industry to the situation that we have at hand, and how to actually harvest that into opportunities that we can use to actually increase efficiency, cost savings, and of course also visibility, right, which we didn't have at the beginning of this journey. And I'm glad that you brought up the example of the e-bills of lading standard by DCSA, because that of course is a very much welcomed initiative. And as you mentioned rightly, the FIT Alliance, we have DCSA working together with FIATA and also BIMCO, looking at the different ways in which electronic bills of lading need to be digitalized within different sectors, whether it's containers, multimodal to bulk, but also, of course, making sure that it works across, right? Because to your community, especially the shippers, it's all bills of lading, right? And it doesn't make sense to have, different people sitting in different rooms and doing different things, not talking to one another. So I think it's really important to have this. And so if we could turn attention to FIATA, Lucinda, I think it's important to have you in this room because we all see the importance of freight forwarders and the key intermediary role that your members play in shipping and logistics, because you connect the shippers community, the importers, exporters, with the ocean carriers, with transport companies, with customs and ports, and so on and so forth. So everybody along the chain would need to more or less touch a freight forwarder. So would you be able to share with us how FIATA and your members have responded to some of these challenges that face your customers, being the shippers, but also the rest of the ecosystem? And as FIATA Digital Project Officer, how have you actually formulated your strategy to help your members go digital and actually have that adaptation and that opportunities harvested for them?
Sure. So first, to give you a bit of context, so FIATA has noted that there is a big disparity of maturity levels towards digitalization among the different players of the supply chain. So we have big companies that are well advanced and often run their own digitalization initiatives, but it's more complicated for SMEs who may not have the necessary resources to work on this. And our members are mostly composed of SMEs. So they have been asking us actually to develop solutions to help them stay relevant with new business models. So that's why we have developed the solutions that will allow SMEs to become digital freight forwarders and to offer additional trust and security to their stakeholders through digitalization. And the different requirements that they have shared with us to develop these solutions were the following. So first, it was really to seek for some optimization and an easy access and a simple solution. So they were asking us really for a solution that they can access through their everyday tools, so the tools that they already use for their daily operations, so they don't have to adopt a new tool. They also ask us to really seek for interoperability, so to make sure that the solution would be interoperable with all the actors of the supply chain and the different modes of transport. So that's why we have adopted an inclusive approach right from the start. And then something that is really important for them also is the question of data ownership. So they really ask us to find a solution to help them keep the control over their data and to also bring additional trust. And this is what we are going to bring through our digital identities. So FIATA is going to verify and certify the identity of its members. Now we are, of course, aware of the different challenges that still need to be overcome to achieve a real end-to-end digital transactions, and especially the exchange of electronic transferable records. So right now it is possible, but only between partners who are using the same platforms. And to allow interoperability between platforms, there are still different challenges that needs to be resolved. The main ones are, well, the technical challenge first. So how do we transfer a title from one platform to another? Then there is the legal challenge, so the lack of harmonized legal framework to legally recognize transferable records around the world. And then there is the semantic challenge that is solved through data standards. And we are conscious that those challenges are beyond FIATA's control, unfortunately. So that's why we are actually, we have started to work with different other organizations to find ways to solve them together through the FIT Alliance, for example. And in the meantime, we have developed a pragmatic and sort of intermediary solution that will allow our members to issue paperless and secured FIATA bill of lading through their everyday tools. So this is going to be really a first step towards the real exchange of data, allowing freight forwarders to decide on the format that they wish to share their FBL, so as a PDF, or they will be able to print it at any time if necessary. And at the basis of our solution, so we have created the EFBL data standard, which is meant really to overcome the challenge of EBL to be exchanged between different platforms. So the question of semantic interoperability. And we have chosen to base our standard on the UNCFACT reference data model, really to allow this interoperability with existing standards and with all actors of the industry. So this will really ensure that all actors and platforms will talk the same language and can therefore start to exchange data. And on top of this, this data model, we have created an API service that will allow freight forwarders to issue secured FBLs through their everyday tools. And so each document is going to be registered on an immutable ledger and will have a unique number and QR code that will allow all stakeholders to verify the document at any time. So stakeholders will be able to scan the QR code on the document or to upload the document on FIATA's verification page to see the document audit trail, which will prove that the document has been registered by FIATA, the identity of its issuer, and the integrity of its content. So our solution will really try to answer to the issues of trust and data ownership, as it will allow freight forwarders to stay in control of their data. So they will be identified by FIATA and their national associations. And through the audit trail, all stakeholders will be able to see that the company is a valid and trustful company because they have been through the KYC, so know your customer process of their national association or FIATA directly. And to conclude, so we think that FIATA's solution will answer to the two aspects of trusted environments, so the authentication and identification. So all document issuers will be identified through their digital identity, and they will have to go through this KYC process done by their national association. And the integrity of the content of the paperless FBL will be assured as the documents will be registered on an immutable ledger.
Thank you, Lucilia. I think that you brought up some very important points, which I do want to come back to in the later part of our discussion, because I think it's really important to come back to that theme in terms of, really helping the SMEs, because similar to you, I think 3/4 of the ICC's global membership are actually small and medium enterprises. So it's really important, and I agree with you totally in terms of the design principles behind the FIATA's EFBL standard. When you design that electronic multimodal bills of lading, to go from your paper-based standard to digital, you have actually started with the very first design principle, which is interoperable, right? And how to make sure that it works for the small and medium enterprises in their everyday tools. So not asking for expensive investments, a total change of infrastructures, which could be very challenging for some of our users. So that's the point that I do want to come back to. But before that, because you mentioned quite a few things which are interesting about technology and, having your electronic bills of lading on immutable ledger and having a tool for people to actually check that, and there's audit trails, and there's multiple technology angles which helps enable trust and a lot of those things, which are really, really interesting. But I think I want to ask Filip a question, if I can, because I think for many people in the room, especially issuers of those bills of lading, whether they are carriers or multimodal transport operators, I think one of the questions that they might have on their mind, and it would be worth clarifying with you, is that, would their risk profile change if they move from analog to digital? Because a lot of this would be unfamiliar environments, and they want to know whether their risk profile, their compliance, their liabilities may change as they make that move. So Filip, please take that question, because I think you are the most qualified person in the room to actually tackle this.
Sure. So thank you, Hannah, for the question. And I think having the insurance background and legal background, I think we do focus on the risk, and it is undeniable that making a significant change, moving away from the physical world to the digital, the risk profile is changing. Of course, the idea behind moving to the digital sphere is that you're trying to mitigate other risk, and some of the risk we already mentioned in our discussion here. With paper, paper bill of lading, for example, we see a lot of theft of bills of lading. There's a fraud involved because paper is easily to defraud. There is the risk of delays with paper, and of course that increases costs and leads to disputes. So we have these risks we're trying to address by going to digital solutions. But of course, with those come other risks, and the risk we particularly been looking at within the P&I legal liability insurance are the legal liability risks. And this is because, of course, bills of lading were designed to be paper. Now we're trying to make them digital, and of course they have to be compliant within the laws, and the legal matrix around the world is very complicated. You have international laws and you have local jurisdictional laws. And of course, there isn't a one international tool that harmonizes it. And therefore, we've been looking at achieving, for the e-bill, electronic bills of lading system, achieving the functional and legal equivalence with whatever the current law is, mainly looking at the English law, admittedly, it being the most popular jurisdiction chosen in international trade. But it does pose a difficulty in assessing your risk profile, because many local jurisdictions may not recognize English jurisdiction clauses, and therefore you'd be always exposed to whatever the local law says. Having said that, there are ways of minimizing that risk by assessing the terms and conditions of these systems. So most people, when they look at changing to new platforms, they focus on how they work, how they can help in operational sense and maybe mitigate that risk. But very often the focus lacks in, what will happen if things go wrong, if there is a claim, if someone challenges the validity of the records or challenges the validity of the contract signed through the digital means. And we've been trying to look at those risks and assess them. And following from that, there are other risks that arise with the digital sphere. One of them is, for example, a system failure. We know computers go inherently wrong regularly. How good is their support if things go wrong? Obviously, these systems are key to operations to any business. If they go down, what happens next? And then the last, which is very often talked about, is cyber exposure. Reliance on digital means that you are exposed to hacking, and what are the ways of dealing with that and how you can protect yourself in this new environment. Another risk area is often, when you think about digitalization, of course, we can't move to digital entirely because the commodities themselves that are being shipped are physical. And there is that area of interaction between the physical world and digital world. And from what we've seen approving these various electronic bills of lading systems, that interaction often is lacking in solutions, practical solutions to tell how we're going to deliver the cargo on the terminal, for example. How can you check whether the person turning up on the terminal saying, look, I'm the electronic bills of lading holder, can I have the cargo? How are we going to check that? So there's a lot of practical aspects that are being addressed as we speak. And obviously the quality it gets better and better and better. And just to let you know that, just to confirm that the digitalization is certainly getting a lot of pace. I've seen in the last few years that a huge increase in interest and the electronic bills of lading vendors approaching the international group for approval. And at the moment, I believe we have, I think, 7 systems approved, and there is at least, I think, 3 other pending. So there is definitely a push. And in a way, the approval, what we've done for the sea carriers as the international group, I think we provided a source of trust that we have looked at those terms, that exposures, and provided insurance, which is the safety net for them to engage in that. And I think that sort of solution gives them confidence to engage with this and be keen to rely on it.
Great, Filip. I think that is a lot of complexities that you have actually helped us uncover, but also we see a pathway through that. So as you mentioned, there's the kind of legal metrics that we all have to get through, and it's not simple. It still differs from country to country, and still we look forward to that legal reform that is being powered through by the ICC Digital Standards Initiative Legal Reform Advisory Board, co-chaired by Chris and also Valentina. So I think that is really going to scale up the legal reform across the board. But in the meantime, as we are going through this transitional phase, as you mentioned, we still have to rely on the T's and C's of different systems and vendors. And for that, they really need to go through a very rigorous assessments to actually assess some of those risks that you mentioned. But I would actually argue a little bit and say that some of those risks are no different from what we are living with today. Because even if we have a paper bills of lading, where it's an EFBL or EBL, most of the time we still scan that paper document and send that through email. So if there's a system failure, if there's a cyber risk attack, well, we're all down, whether or not we start with a paper or digital document, but we can have that discussion another time. I'd like to turn my attention to Patrik, if possible, because I think, Patrik, you have talked about Enigio and the fact that Enigio has been working on trying to digitalize original paper documents for a while now. And I think some of the issues that Filip mentioned is a very good segue towards your solution and what it can potentially do, because there's always this challenge between paper and digital, and that that space in between that Filip talked about, right? That is still that interaction. You need to have a transition. You need to be able to check. And some people still operate on paper. Not everyone on that supply chain is actually entirely digital. So can you share some of the issues that you have looked at as you design the solution from your end? And were you able to address some of the concerns that Patrik flagged up?
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Hannah. And you're right. Our starting point has been to replicate the paper with Trace Original, and we are not out to disrupt anything, because we think making a change without making a change is the best way forward. And the only proven thing to work so far has been the paper in all dimensions. That's why we are where we are, but that is not what is going to take us where we need to be. So the solution which we have developed for electronic trade documents using Trace Original address the key point from the industry. And when I say the industry, we should not forget that the supply chain consists of many more stakeholders than just the logistic transport company. So we have the same demands from banks, certification bodies, etc. And the point which we have addressed is the control of data. Someone talked about that, data ownership, and which is very, very important. And the way we have addressed that is that the data need to stay in the documents. Only the one in control of the document are able to share the data or access the data. The hashes are published on the blockchain for traceability, verification, audit trail, nothing else. So data in the document, hashes in the notary. Interoperability, important part discussed here. And in the documents, there are the ability to include any type of data structure, formats, or standards, because there will be multiple standards. If you look at road and sea, will we develop the same standard? Probably not. And then we can cut this in all kind of dimensions. So in order to be interoperable, our electronic trade documents need to be able to carry various types of data structures, and they need to be. They need also to be able to work with the transport management systems, and there are multiple transport management systems in order to get the SDP process. The third one, which I would like to mention, is the dependency. The electronic trade document Trace Original doesn't have any dependency to any closed platform. We are not a platform. We are just electronic trade documents. And as I said, it's platform agnostic, because we don't believe that anyone will sign up with every platform, and not one single platform will have everyone sign up to them. So I think that's kind of reality we need to deal with. Then freely transferable. it needs to be able to transfer these electronic trade documents to any party, anywhere, anytime. And for Trace Original electronic trade document, we have built it in the way that you only need the computer and the internet to transfer ownership of the document or manage the document. And then, of course, when we talk about the model law, that's kind of being model law compliance is a hygiene things, the possession, the transferability, the singularity, signature lock to the text, authentication, etc. That's hygiene factors, I think, for anyone who want to play in this market. So that's what we have developed. And the last thing I would like to mention is the change of media, because that is really important for a couple of aspects. One, you need to be able to change from document to paper, and from digital to paper, and from paper to digital, because there are instances that is really needed. It's a control mechanism. And secondly, paper and digital documents will coexist. That will be the case. So they need to be able to run in parallel. That's how we have designed and developed and launching Trace Original.
Thank you, Patrik. I really like some of the elements that you mentioned in terms of those design principles. Again, that as you look at and you try to solve this enormous problem in front of us, but using some very enlightened principles about, recognizing that there's diversity in the world. There are a variety of transport management systems that different users will use. Again, back to FIATA's point about, enabling your members to use their everyday tools to go digital. And then also recognizing that you want to have a platform agnostic approach, not locking in people in and enabling people to have that choices for their respective use case, and having that flexibility as we recognize that there's a transitional phase, for everyone to go through. So I would like to come back to James. And before that, we see some questions already streaming in through Swapchat. So thank you to the audience for those questions, which we will address in a moment later. But I would like to just go back to James, because, representing shippers, and you have heard, right? There are a lot of people, a lot of initiatives, a lot of organizations actively trying to solve the challenges facing shippers. And as you have seen, we have the freight forwarders community very actively working on that. Pilots have been completed from FIATA. They are already testing successfully that this work. We have the insurance, angle that we know that there are risks, but can be mitigated. There are mechanisms to actually kind of certify that there are solutions that could work, and there are also technology platforms or utilities like Enigio, for instance, among many others, who could actually make that transition a little bit simpler. So, would you think that all of these combination factors, right, are they kind of like enough to help your shippers, especially the smaller and medium enterprises, kind of like make that decision that, yes, I think it's possible for me to go digital? Or do you think that they need something else to actually make that switch?
Well, the international trading community won't be the first commercial or industrial sector to switch from analog to digital, and I think the way I like to think about this, especially when I'm trying to explain the opportunities and the benefits to shippers and shippers councils, is to think about the other transitions that have been made in other experiences in our lives, and think about your own journey as a consumer through the various changes in technology in entertainment and so on. And I think those breakthroughs in transition were made when there certainly was a consolidation of the offer. There was some confidence and assurance around the durability of the offer. And I'm going to reveal my age here, but going back to even video technology, was it VHS or Betamax? Was it Windows or was it Linux or Apple in computer operating systems? There were a lot of people that just stepped back and allowed the market to shake down from all the early adventurism and until there were not only some stability in the offer, but also providers had started to round out their offer to the ultimate consumer of the service, and from where they would attract a lot of their business. in order to make that switch as pain-free and easy as possible. And I would listening to shippers and listening to the challenges that they're facing, and remember they're facing multiple other challenges on other fronts. So this is not the only thing on their desk. But I think those service providers and activities that are able to think through the user journey, supplement the offer with other added value services, and above all make this an experience and a journey that's been thought through from the customer's point of view, from the user's point of view. They are the features that have led to success in other transitions. I like what I see in terms of the connectivity and the ways in which different systems are beginning to come together. But I think inevitably it will be the larger corporations, the larger buyers and sellers with much greater economies of scale that can be achieved through digitalization that will lead first, and allow almost a secondary offer to emerge based on a lot of that experience for the small and medium-sized enterprises who will be wanting to, again, show my age, buy off the shelf. Inevitably, you'll download from a store or a central website, won't you? The application that you run locally, but it needs to be as simple and as straightforward as that. In order for this to really become easy and appeal to the smaller sized enterprise. If I may, Hannah, I just mentioned two other things listening to the previous contributions. One other thing that I've noticed is that the development of dedicated systems for international trade and shipping are certainly significant and can't be ignored. But a lot of digital transactions already take place in global trade around the world, especially in the consumer goods sector. And we shouldn't underestimate the significance and the pace of development and spread of conventional, if that's the word, but trading platforms established by retailers and importers. So a lot of payments are made and received for goods through those clearing platforms now, and they have established the connectivity, they've established working practices in many between many buyers and sellers, and therefore the core procedures and practices are in place. And I'm not certain to what extent this is applicable and relevant, but it seems to me that you've got that mindset already switched into a digital trading environment there. And maybe these, and indeed maybe the logical development of these is to spread from simple payments for goods received or and so on into the wider servicing and support of other trade documentation. But it could be from, if you like, from the outside in to this sector, rather than just purely coming through as developments specifically created for logistics. And I think that shouldn't be underestimated or ignored in our wider considerations. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, James. That's really a refreshing perspective, and I do agree with you. And I was at an industry event in person in Singapore 2 days ago, and somebody mentioned just exactly that, a similar parallel story where people are saying that, look, we are having a new pool of talents joining the trade and supply chain industry. They are growing up in a digital first, mobile first experience. They deal with, like you mentioned, e-commerce, shopping, everything at the click of a button. And you expect them to go into offices on Mondays and do all these things paper-based like they have done 50 years ago. That is not just going to fly, right? So things are going to change because the way people expect things to work are going to be very, very different. Yes. And I hear you. I think what you're saying is that the digitalization movement has started. It's not new. But of course, to see that roll out throughout the international trade community, especially for the smaller, medium-sized enterprises, it might take a little bit more of time because we need to have that well-tested, of course, through bigger players who have bigger resources and training and an ability to test out things, right? And then when people actually adopt they will feel a bit more safer. And I think we have a few questions related to that in the chat. And I think I see Filip already tackling 2 of those questions. So thank you very much. I do want to come back to Lucelia, because I think we talked about SMEs, and that was a very big focus for you. So, do you think that the way that FIATA has actually tried to digitalize your paper-based FBL standard to bring into the eFBL standard, will that help your members, but will also help the wider part of the ecosystem, the rest of the supply chain participants? How do you think, people like customs, people like ports, people like, other people that banks that deals with the documents that FIATA members are going to produce digitally, how are they actually going to benefit from that?
Yes, well, I think the main thing that we are bringing through our FBL paperless solution is the additional trust and security of the document. Because as I've said, all the document issuers are going to be identified through a digital identity. And so basically, all the stakeholders who will interact with this document will be ensured that the company who has issued the document is trustful, because it is a valid FIATA member and it has a valid liability insurance. And they will be, all the stakeholders, so the customs, the banks, etc., they will all be able to verify the document at any time. So they will be able to ensure that it is a valid document, that it hasn't been modified also, because as I've said, the document will be registered on an immutable ledger, so it will be protected against fraud risks. And they will be able to also verify the identity of the document issuer. So yeah, hopefully that will help to other stakeholders to adopt those electronic documents.
So basically, you're just saying that we are layering the additional technology layer to actually help with authenticating some of the things that people would have to authenticate, even if it was a paper-based document in the first place, right? So now we are going digital. You are putting in layers of technology to actually help with that task. And I think I would like to just pick up one question from the audience, because it talks about the way that, let's say all these transferable records are being dealt with in the banking space. So the question is from our audience, John Walden, asking how does this sit with, for example, documentary requirements under an LC where a negotiable document is required. So maybe I would like to take this question very quickly, because this is right where the heart of ICC is. We have an ICC Banking Commission that actually makes rules and practices for the banking community. And of course, as part of that, we have the UCP, which is the rules and best practices for documentary credit. And as we go digital, we have the ICC EUCP rules, which means that you take everything from the paper-based world to digital, and we have a process and best practices to actually guide the banks how to do electronic presentation of bills of ladings, warehouse receipts, and all those transferable documents. So yes, it can be done. The standards are there. I think as we have heard from FIATA and also other similar standards like DCSA, there are rules and best practices to actually help the banking community to actually facilitate those documentary requirements. So let's come back to you, Patrik, because I think you mentioned quite a few important points in your previous intervention, especially around, I think, having a pragmatic approach, right? And we have heard in various instances in this panel that it's all well and good where we're going, but we need to be pragmatic. We need to be able to show the business case, especially for people who are a little bit unsure, because whether, like it or not, some people think of it as first mover advantage. Some people think of it as first mover disadvantage, because you may not know whether this is the right place to bet your entire investment on, right? So, if you could think about how you bring your solution to market, how to make people adopt some of these solutions that you are bringing out as a way to overcome the challenges. Is there a business case that you think is very clear to help everyone in the value chain to digitalize?
I think on the first question there, in terms of, reducing the barriers of adaptability, I go back to what I said originally. You know, we are not here to disrupt, and I think no one, you know, in this forum thinks that that is the right way, because that would be uphill. The change without doing a change is the approach which we taking with Trace Original, that, you know, keep your current processes, keep your current policy and procedure, your IT system, market practice, not to be neglected. We are in different part of the world. We are in different layer of the value chain. So if we can stick to what we know and digitalize that, the paper, then we have got a long way. And I'm a little bit cautious about what I hear from FIATA, which on, you know, involving the banking sector, because they are also building, you know, platforms, and they are also looking at standards. So I think we need and they are an important part of the supply chain, of course. So just so we don't, you know, trying to solve the problem in one place and then we opening up for you know, a challenge in another place where we need to address the interoperability between sectors of the value chain. So, but then I guess coming back to what action to take, we can discuss that later on. But on the question on business case, yes, I have a huge respect for that, because every party in the value chain may not have the same business case. And we talked about the top-down approach, which is fine, you know, waterfalling digitalization, but we also need to talk about the bottom-up approach, because we working on these CMRs, digital CMRs. And one of our biggest challenges there is not the big transporting companies. They understand, they adopt, they have the resources. It's the contractor, the drivers. They are supposed to use their own mobile phone to have our digital CMRs. And they are quite resistant to do that, because they don't see what's in it for them. So we need to build our value proposition, not to target the direct user, but also the indirect users and the people which this gets consequences for, and secure that it's something in it for them also. That's at least my lesson learned in the journey so far.
Thank you, Patrik. I think that's a really important point that you mentioned, because again, we sometimes forget all the different indirect and different layers of people and processes that are interlinked as we go deeper and deeper into the supply chain, and we realize how many hands, you know, how many hands used to touch that paper, and now as we all want to go digital on one part, how does it affect the rest, right? So I think, James, you are nodding. So I think you are really connected to this problems that we're talking about.
Well, I was only going to say, as an example of the ultimate consumer, the truck driver. If we can convince the truck driver that this is a good thing, we're probably saying and doing the right thing. So I think it's a really good test, and the certainly experiences that the UK is encountering in implementing and managing all its new border controls as a result of its leaving the EU single market and customs union are certainly crystallising a lot of thinking in the UK around, for example, ECMRs, as we've heard. And I just wanted to stress the importance of focusing on the end user, because there needs to be tangible benefit for this to be had. And to that extent, I just also throw this in, going back to shipping, in particular container shipping, the handling of documentation has always been an activity rife with the application of surcharges and other costs associated with the physical transfer and security and of documentation. And shippers and their representatives, including the GSF, have long been known for expressing the frustration about the costs this adds to the total cost of sales and certainly cost of doing business. Again, appealing to the ultimate consumer, demonstrating that the implementation of digital systems removes or abolishes these kinds of unexpected and sometimes difficult to understand costs, would be a huge symbolic step forward, not just a gesture, because we're talking significant amounts of money in aggregate, but simply demonstrating and convincingly demonstrating that the digitalisation of trade documentation was a route to avoid those unexpected surcharges and additional on costs which plague traditional routes. I think would be a major demonstration to the shipper community that this was something they could actually benefit from.
That's a huge, yeah. Sorry,
can I add
Patrik?
something to the business phase? Because we have one party here which is incredibly important, which is not in the room for the moment, and that the custom authorities and other public parties. And there is also, to my knowledge, some efficiency constraints in doing the custom declaration, etc. processes. So they need to also tap into this discussion full-hearted in order to really leverage the business case for all parties in the value chain, just so we don't forget them.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Patrik. And I just want to mention that, James, you just accidentally answered one question from our audience. We have Nguyen here having a question for James. How much do shippers and consignees care for bills of lading outside of sales which involve letters of credit? Because to his point, and it's a very valid point, I'm just reading out here, delivery against seaway bills and airway bills are straightforward because consignees just have to identify themselves, and these are largely electronic documents already to a large extent. So I think you just answered that very well, using that efficiency, cost savings argument, which is, just perfect.
Well, I'll just add if I may, very quickly, Hannah, and it was at an ICC event in London that Chris Southworth invited me to, must be 2 or 3 years ago now. But the emergence of alternative payment mechanisms in the ways like trading platforms, and I think represents a significant competitive threat to the traditional interests of the banking sector. And not to put too fine a point on it, unless they get their act together quickly to buy into the digitalisation journey, I think they're going to find themselves marginalised or disintermediated, I think is what you call it, in a digitalisation process, because there are easier ways of doing the things that banks traditionally do. And that includes substitutions for things like letters of credit, bills of lading and so on. They need to be careful if they want to retain a stake in this activity.
Yes. I think we have another member of our audience here who just kind of nodded to you virtually, saying that we need more banks and corporates that need to look at it. And because, as you rightly mentioned, even though Patrik says that we're not here to disrupt, but I think the disruption has already started. And if people just sit still and don't do anything, they will actually be left behind, because people expect the experience to get simpler and easier. And like you say, it's all about the user experience. It's all about the user journey, right? That determines what needs to be adopted.
Disruption is the excuse those give that missed the boat.
All right, I really like that. So I think we have quite a few lively comments here in the chat, which we won't be able to read out all, but really thank you so much for that lively discussion. There's a lot of ground I think we have covered in the last hour, and of course I would have loved to have another hour to talk to all of you about this. And to Chris and the organizer, I think next year if we have this webinar again, let's have a customs officer and also the bank sitting in to complete this picture. So in the last 50 minutes or so, we have uncovered quite a few areas, where freights and logistics systems and processes can be improved already today, not waiting for, things to, of course, things will be enhanced and further, technological advance in the future, but there are things that can be done today already to address some of the challenges facing service providers and end users. And there's already standards and there's already solutions which are interoperable, available today, which can be adopted, hopefully not only by the big businesses, but also the small and medium enterprises. And I think a question that keeps coming back that I hear from our panelists today is we need to really articulate very well what is the value to each individual supply chain actors and how do we start that transformation from our organization's level, and how to build skill, right? So I think scale is something that happens when everyone acts together. And given the kind of scope of change that we need, that is necessary to create a truly digital trade experience from end to end, I think we need all of us and also our ecosystem players to actually be part of that journey. And that, of course, coming back to standards and technology solutions that can facilitate the process, we need to start implementing them, and then kind of like surfacing, maybe these things need to be further enhanced, they need to be further improvements. And that's how we actually get that experience, which we get, I always remember, again, to your point, James, I'm not going to reveal my age, but I have lived long enough to know that there are days where it's not so seamless like what we have now, right? We don't have that experience where in your mobile phone, you can do everything. We have lived through the days where it's the landlines, and then we move to that brick of a mobile phone, and we can't really call everyone, but still it's useful. It's better than nothing. And then you have like, better phones, and then you have like a mini computer in your hand. So that's really a journey. Yeah. So the last thing I would like to end before inviting Chris to come back is to invite each and every one of you in the audience and the panelists to check out the latest Standards Toolkit for Cross-Border Paperless Trade that ICC DSI just released a couple of weeks ago together with the WTO, in which you will find many of the standards and technology interoperable frameworks that we just talked about. So some of the terms that you may have heard can be slightly unfamiliar, but with that pocket guide, 20 pages, you will be able to get some of these resources. And the earlier we do that, the better prepared each of us will be in facing this digital future that has already here. So thank you very much, and back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Hannah. And that Standards Toolkit is on your platform, so easy to download. It's readily available. Totally agree with that. Can I just say a massive thank you to our speakers today, and to you, Hannah, for moderating. Again, fantastic session, really interesting, and really does pick up on these themes, cutting across all the sessions, and certainly gives us clarity on what we need to do next. Can I also say a special thank you to you, Patrik, and Enigio for sponsoring this session. I think that's really super helpful for us and makes a huge difference to us putting these kind of sessions on. And certainly this conference is going to be a lot bigger next year. I can see that. We've got an awful lot of things to talk about. So for the audience, the next session is on digital identities and specifically legal entity identifiers. And that's going to kick off at 2 o'clock British Standard Time or Greenwich Mean Time. That's going to be a really important session. We know take up and adoption is low. We know we need to increase it. The exam question is, how do we do that? And what are the barriers? So come and join us for that session at 2 o'clock. And otherwise, I will let you all go and have a cup of coffee and a break or a bite to eat, and we'll see.